Done it again. I topped with a deck that I built, and this time we're in Go format. Even though I play a lot of Edison, and I think this channel is going to be mostly about Edison content, I also play a lot of other formats, Go included, obviously. Depending on who you ask, I'm top 20 in Go, top 10, maybe top 1, And I recently got top 8 at FLC31, hosted on Format Library. Out of about 150 players, I believe. I did it with Go Control, which is a deck that a lot of people consider dead in the format. It's pretty widely accepted that Chaos Turbo is the best deck, and even though it's not quite like tier 0 status, that might be if it's getting 12 or 14 out of a top 16, it's pretty close, it's maybe like 8 to 10 maybe. And Warrior can give it a run for its money. But I think if you ask any serious player, they would just say Turbo is the best deck, But probably the third best deck is Go Control. And since 2005, when you had all these, crazy lists that people were topping with, and even like detox lists when people were reviving the format in 2016, we've seen a lot of different changes. And over the past year and a half or so, the lists that have had the most success are like, I'm thinking of Geist D at Worlds last year, pretty interesting list. Leo P is also someone, shout out to the Bongo Boys always, and JCBD. These are all pretty highly performing Go players. Kind of, I think, revolve around a lot of the same ideas of like relatively low monster count. A lot of them are playing Merchant, a lot of them are playing Abyss Soldier, some of them are playing DMOC, some of them are playing the Jars, trying to dominate the late game, like force a lot of complicated game states, and then have a lot more blowout cards than more normal decks like Warrior or Turbo, and just really be able to explode after stalling for a while with their goats in meta. So one advantage also that Go Control has in that regard is a lot of Turbo players aren't really familiar with the matchup to a super high degree. Plus, there's kind of a lot of different builds. Like maybe they've played against a kind of more classic Go Control style list, thinking Asura Priest, Air Knights, or whatever. A lot of people are pretty familiar with those lists if you've touched Go format at all. Newer lists have a lot of variety, and it can be really hard as you're going into game one to know exactly what text they're playing and how to play around it. And in general, if you're playing Turbo, you want to play pretty conservatively, waiting on your Sorks, your BLS. Otherwise, they'll just get countered by their metas, their creature swaps. And it really actually takes a lot of patience and skill to navigate playing that matchup correctly. It definitely requires like a certain kind of mindset to bring this deck to a tournament and play it to a high level, dare I say, a grind set. I think that was something I wanted as a challenge for myself, much like the Blackwing video I did the other week. It was kind of like, oh, this is a deck that you have to be really, really skilled to play, and you got to play in this really particular way. And I want to see for myself, am I up to the challenge? I liked also the way that these other Go Control lists and these players that use them it seems very like tailor-made to their play style, and they talk about it almost with like it's like a glove that fits you perfectly or something. So really just coming from a point of curiosity, I just wanted to see like what would my ideal Go Control build look like and how could I adapt it to fit the current meta. While we're here, please, I'm going to do my YouTuber shilling, drop a like, comment, subscribe, and actually please let me know if you like this style of video, the intro, then the deck, then some explanation of the tournament. That's what I did for the Blackwing one as well. I know, I can be kind of long-winded and I'm still getting used to recording these types of things. So if there's a subject you want me to cover or a format that you think would be more effective, I'm happy to hear your feedback and would very much appreciate the feedback. This is the Go Control list, and I do feel like there were some reasons that I was attracted to Go Control at this like specific point in time for this particular tournament. They're going pretty light on Book of Moons. A lot of them are main decking Sakuretsus, main decking heavy copies of Dust Shoot, and even in the side, lighter on copies of Book of Moon there, even lighter on copies of Wang Hu, and just like more generic hate against Scapegoat. I think a lot of those things have kind of fallen out of favor as people, really try to metagame for Turbo and Warrior. So I saw a little bit of a window that like the sides and these things could be kind of lighter. And even though I've been experimenting in Turbo with a lot of kind of unique sides against these newer forms of control decks, I do actually, they're a really scary matchup to play. I'm thinking of cards like Compulsory Evacuation Device or Possessed Dark Soul. These are things that I've like messed around with as like one-ofs. But I know a lot of other people definitely aren't on those type of cards. So again, I just thought if I had to deal with kind of normal side deck options, which at the present moment are not that many, and a lot of people that aren't that familiar playing this matchup, then I could be in a pretty good spot. And a lot of the decks that are really, really trying to counter Turbo at the moment, you know, maybe you're focused on like Zoborg and Spy interactions, or you have a small warrior package, or these like, you know, tomato aggro-y Stein things, like various kind of warrior builds or these kind of anti-stun type decks. You know, Go Control is a lot of those decks like Worst Nightmare, Earth Aggro as well. They hate playing against Go Control, these like classic style versions that you can really just abuse the Thousand Eyes and stuff. I sacrificed a little bit in this version. Like the Decos are not always particularly good in that matchup. The Zoborgs can be kind of slow, whatever. But I still have enough of like the essential interactions that sometimes Thousand Eyes just like solos a lot of those decks if they're really, really metagamed for Turbo. And yeah, I felt like people were getting kind of tired of Turbo, and more so than people using Turbo and like metagaming for all the decks that are trying to beat them. Like I thought people were trying to make these counter decks or these really hyper metagame specific decks. And yeah, Go Control just seemed like an interesting pick to take advantage of some of that stuff too. And so the deck specifically, I tested a lot of the more common versions, as I just spoke on, Geisty, you know, those are Merchant and Abyss Soldier and Demon. Found those all to be a little too combo centric and a little too focused on the late game. And especially in this world when people are maxing main deck Dust Shoot, it was a little hard to guarantee getting to that point when you have a lot of kind of combo cards, Go meta, that can have trouble kind of like getting a start if you're already behind on the Dust Shoot. So I wanted a lot more standalone cards, and yeah, Abyss Soldiers end up seeming too combo-y, you know, stuff like Facilier Dragon or Mobius or Call the Haunted. These just weren't really working out for me. Merchant is just always kind of weird, like can mill your BLS, can mill your power cards. Basically, my version is kind of focused around, I would say, abusing like these early game flips, you know, Triple Moth, Double Deco, converting off a Zoborg, you know, even when you're not doing your GOAT meta soup interactions, flipping a Deco and tributing it for Zaborg is an insane play in 2005 era. They have a slow start or unable to resolve an early Dust Shoot card like that, then the Reaper, the Kaiku, and the Dukoichis, really, if I'm resolving the flip, those can all get in for early aggression and kind of just make sure that then when they finally do have to answer that, either Sorcerer or Tribe or like whatever they have to do, that's when the metas and stuff come down. And so I think it kind of gives a nice layered game plan where I don't always have to be so reliant on GOAT meta. And plus, like things like the Zaborg help you break your own Thousand Eyes lock or clear space on your board, which happens sometimes. They're lights, obviously. Having the light count is a big issue in this deck because you don't have Thunder Dragons, as you would in Chaos Turbo. And even though these cards are really focused on the early game, a lot of them actually do have application in the late game too, like Solemn and Dust Shoot. Obviously, you want to see those early. You want to get early Trinity. You want to snipe their best cards and set yourself up for resolving the stuff you want to resolve early. But in the event that you're not able to do that, those are also really good cards in complicated late game scenarios. So if you do end up kind of having those early games where you're sitting on a GOAT for a while, you finally use it, you're Thousand Eyesing, you're waiting for them to draw an out, you're kind of passing back and forth, building up your Dust Shoots, your Solemns, like your other flips and your Zaborgs and stuff like that, still is a pretty good spot for you to be in. I was really happy with the side plan too. That was something that I was kind of focused on from the very beginning with this kind of small warrior package, and that hedges against a lot of like common side patterns. You know, I think it's pretty common against Go Control. You might want to side out some battle traps if you're on warrior, I guess specifically, or you know, some kind of less interactive cards, and you're not expecting, you know, the Mystic Swordsman to come down and punish a set. You might be, you know, trying to bait mind cons, trying to bait metas, and it kind of just like slices through all that stuff, as well as the Zambaras. That's a card that's been seeing a lot of popularity even in the Turbo main deck, and I was actually trying this in the main deck. Again, like I think it was better suited for the side here. And also the one important thing about the Rota package and Warriors is it really helps in the burn matchup. I have to side like 11 cards or something because my main deck is so weak. You can see like Go Meta, Solemns, you know, the weak flips. I have to get pretty lucky to beat burn game one, I think. But post board, you know, I have Rota for Amazon's Archer to clear all the Ojama tokens, and I have all the Dust Nodes, all the Hollow Life Barrier, which is a pretty neat card. I would say, you know, interesting card to try out nowadays, especially with the kind of like DMOC launch deck that got kind of popular, the Spell Economics deck that I believe Campos topped with. It kind of is good against that deck because it can stop their battle-based OTK plan or their burn damage. And I actually did play against a Reasoning Gate Sparky Clary in this tournament, and it did help there. So basically, to summarize, you know, though focusing on the early game flip interactions, more standalone cards, it kind of helps stifle Turbo in the early game when you can kind of go toe-to-toe with them. And then the rest of your deck kind of is the hedge against Warrior, even though those flips in particular are not super strong. And yeah, it just kind of all came together quite nicely where I have like enough variety. Like I think one important thing about Go Control is unlike a more kind of like optimized list, you see a lot of one-ofs and stuff. But that's because it's not just like lazy deck building. It's because as you get into these late game scenarios, you want to have a variety of threats. You know, if you're getting to 5 cards left in deck, you don't want a bunch of redundant Kaikus or Reapers. You want the one of Lightning Vortex or whatever. You know, you want these cards that can catch the opponent by surprise, you know, answer these kind of like complicated game states that you might get into. I actually lost round 1, kind of a bummer, to a newer player, Dilfintivas, great name. And he ironically was also on Go Control. He was one of the 3 Go Control players that made top 16, which is like way higher of a conversion rate than it's, I believe, been over the past, you know, year or something. And it was basically the best performing deck behind Turbo and Warrior. And while that's, you know, anecdotal and the results don't mean that much, but a handful of people choosing Go Control and all kind of converting on it, even with different builds, it makes me feel like a little validated in my kind of meta call that like, oh, this can kind of take advantage of a lot of the fringe decks people are playing to counter Turbo, as well as like having a decent Turbo matchup if you build it correctly. So, but in this match in particular, my deck was definitely not built for the mirror, as you can see. No Book of Moons, and he had main deck stuff like Syrup, Abyss Soldier. I believe he did have a Syrup piece actually. He had Book of Moons, and combined with honestly some pretty good draws from him, I kind of just got destroyed. But the rest of the rounds of Swiss were actually pretty smooth sailing. And I went 7-0, just straight out the next 7 rounds to finish with a 7-1 record. Because my only loss in Swiss round 1, so I just had to grind it straight through. And honestly, the deck was decking. Like none of the matches stuck out as particularly difficult. Even like I think I maybe was drawing above average. The Reasoning Gate matchup I mentioned a minute ago against Sparky Clary was very, very tense. That's kind of how it always is against that deck, especially as I'm playing a little bit of a slower deck. And I had some tough matches against LA 1997 and Ghost Rider. You know, those are always going to be tough players playing on Turbo. But I played kind of a wide variety of decks. Some Chaos Return and like aggro chaos type stuff, ironically from Splevin, who, as I mentioned, I kind of took some of the ideas from this list. Played some decks that seemed kind of tailored to beat Turbo, but I had a good enough match up against them just because of the Go Control core. And ironically, my run ended like right where it started, losing to my man Dilfintivas in top 8. And honestly, this match was like even more frustrating than the first one. You know, the first one, it was also round 1, so I didn't have any information on what this guy might be playing. So all his texts and stuff were kind of catching me by surprise. By this top 8 match, I had been able to look at some of the replays and I knew basically what his deck looked like. But yeah, one of those super frustrating matches, like game 1 resolved a Dust Shoot and knew his hand was pretty dead and was able to drop a BLS back by Solemn. Thought it was just probably smooth sailing, but he had drawn like Pot and Graceful on consecutive turns. So we had a bunch of new cards. All were perfect to answer the BLS. And, game 2 was kind of just more of the same, Pot, Graceful. But again, like I said, my deck wasn't really prepared to deal with the mirror, and that with some variants, I can't really be too upset. In conclusion, how do I feel about Go Control now? It was definitely an interesting process, and I definitely think there's a lot of room for innovation. I probably would say it's like the 3rd best deck, at least right now, if you're metagaming it correctly. And like I did, if you find a build that fits your playstyle, I think it can be a pretty rewarding deck to play, and also just kind of teaches you some good skills about playing late games and stuff like that. It's very just adaptable to whatever techs are popular in the moment. Like right now, if people are main decking Zombira, that's great against that. As always, a lot of players aren't great at playing against these kind of like slow, grindy decks. That being said, Chaos Turbo is always going to have this like blowout factor, crazy card destructions, Night Assailants, and it's kind of hard to justify in my mind, even after doing pretty well with it, playing these kind of like flip heavy GOAT versions. Like if I'm playing Faith and Deco, you're still fairly weak to like Mind Con and Dust Shoot, but you're not having quite as much consistency as the early game starts of like Spies and Thunder Dragons. Like you don't always have that great turn 1 play. Yeah, so maybe going back to Chaos Turbo, but it's always going to be something I kind of have in my back pocket if the meta calls for it, if I'm feeling it. So as always, I recommend experimenting with your own list, so you can adapt mine, whatever. Look at Geist, JCVD, Sloven, Dilf now. I'm very curious to see his list too. And but I'm happy to add my own spin to the archetype and kind of do Goat Control proud. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and the Goat content, and stay tuned for more. Many more to come, many more tournament tops and decks to talk about. Peace.